Hello everyone, Blayne here from MLS FI to talk to you about some early game strategy regarding team value and why you might want to choose one of these couple of strategies we've developed for the game. There's two basic schools of thought here when we talk about about early game value, and one of them is just to play normal, let your team value grow naturally, and make the best decisions every week. The other one is to play the game to maximize your value and try to minimize your losses. This strategy really tries to avoid the highest priced players early in the season until they can get a baseline in that we can better predict their price changes. Even when some of those players have good matchups that might have a little bit of downside to them. So we look at that. This strategy also builds on an abundance of budget players, leading to a deeper bench, which leads to more price rise potential. A big thing to note about playing this way is that a full bench of players can give you an extra 2 million value if everybody goes up the maximum amount each week. That is huge in the early game. But each option has its drawbacks as well. When you play normally, you're not going to be seeing those price increases quite as fast as somebody who's trying to game the system. It can put you at a disadvantage a little bit later on in the early season, where you may fall $500,000 or $1 million short of getting that next premium player you want, while somebody who's been playing the value game a little bit more early is capable of grabbing those extra players that you can't. The problem with the price gain system is you are spreading your budget thin early in the season, and you may fall behind in the points overall. It can be very hard to make up a 50 or 60 point deficit mid to late season if you've played the value game too much and you've fallen way too far behind the pack. Now, a lot of veterans will tell you that the correct answer is to do both. Play the best players, play the great matchups, look for those teams that you know you're going to want to target to grab players. And then when you're trying to fill the rest of your team in, look at some of those budget options that are available to you and let that be your deciding factor between who you choose as your second, third, fourth midfielder and potentially to fill your bench. Now I've got it up on the screen here. You can see this is what I would consider to be my most budget-friendly team available for the first week. And as you can see at the top of the screen, I have got an extra $2.5 million in the bank on top of this. We're banking on some cheaper options in midfield that are premier playmakers for their team. I know some people will say Roldan is not that type of guy, but when he plays on the wing, I like him. He's a little bit lower, and he's going to get consistent points, whereas the other guys are going to share some of that. We've got a lot of just good, solid defensive options that are known for getting bonus points while being cheap. We've got a stacked bench full of guys that are getting results, playing in preseason. We've got two starting strikers out there that are both slated to be the starter in a decent matchup where we expect a lot of goals. This is a team I would look at to do maximum price gain for week one. I think it could work. These are guys that you could look at to fill in your bench if you do change up a little bit. I mean, Rasmussen's for Portland is at 4.5, and if he's slated to be the starter, that's a no-brainer to throw in there. You're getting a cheap defender that frees up money for everything else. You're getting a lot of price rise potential, and you've got it's all win-win-win all the way around with a player like him. Whereas a guy like Cifuentes in El Tráfico, 8 million, but he is looking like they're 10, the closest thing they have to a 10. Tons of playmaking potential there, a lot to work with. And if he doesn't quite hit those point totals you would like, where Lucho Acosta we're expecting to with Cincinnati against Houston, he's going to have an easier time of getting you that full $500,000 price rise that's maximum, or for maximum for a single player in a single week. With that said, we kind of have to go over a few numbers here, and having these guys out here makes it really easy where I can reference a few of the players on the screen. We've been on this system for a few years now, and we are looking at what we know, what we've kind of been able to tell, even though the mechanics behind this are proprietary and we are not allowed to see what's going on. We do know in the early season about what I would call the 2/3 rule. A player needs to score about 2/3 of his cost in points in order to not lose value each round. So a guy that cost you $9 million needs to hit about 6 points, or he's going to potentially lose value at the end of the week. And the farther down that track he slips away from 6, the worse it's going to be. That really plays into this. A defender that cost you $6 million, if he gets a 2, he's going to hold steady. So your defenders are pretty safe. But a defender that starts at 4.5, if he gets a 2, you're right on that threshold of, okay, you're at half. What's going to happen? We've actually been known to see price bumps from that at times early in the season. Not much, but it can happen. So we look at that 2/3 rule. If you don't think a guy is going to get 2/3 of his value in points, and you're trying to play the value game, that's a guy to avoid. Hani Mukhtar's one. He's potentially got an injury. He's starting the season at 10 million. If he doesn't hit that 6-7 points, he's potentially going to lose value. If he's got a nagging injury and it gets amplified a little bit, he's a value risk right there for you for the first week. We also know that the farther over, or to get a price rise, we've seen this more and more. After that 2/3, you're kind of in that holding pattern, and as the player approaches their value in points is when we start seeing the more significant price increases. If you're right above that 2/3 number, if you're not quite to 1-to-1, you're going to see maybe a 0.1, 0.2 increase. But to get that full 0.5, you've got to really exceed your price point. Defenders are a great way to do this, especially if you're looking at clean sheets or just cheaper options. Reagan for Seattle is on the screen here. He is a $5 million defender. If Seattle happens to get that clean sheet against Colorado, that's his 5 points there, plus minutes, plus everything. He's one of my premier candidates for week 1 to get a full increase if he can get that clean sheet and give you that $500,000 over. It's a great opportunity to do that, and then that's where shying away from premium players comes back in. We go back to Mukhtar. Mukhtar needs to get about 10 to see a decent price increase. He's probably going to need to push that 11, 12, 13 to see the full $500,000 that we would like to get from a player, whereas Cifuentes really only needs an 8, 9, 10 to see that full $500,000. So you're playing that if you're playing the value game. You look at these little bit cheaper options and more of them instead of multiple premium players to help out. Finally, the biggest question we always have is, what are your goals for the year? I'd love to hear back on what your goals for the year are as we start the season, as we start planning strategy. For me, my goal is always to finish top 200 overall. I play for the long haul. I play for overall position. I love to make Champions League. Champions League is definitely a goal of mine, but top 200 is my number one priority. I'd love to be top 100. Top 50 is kind of the dream of mine. Once we start hitting that top 1,000 players, it gets really competitive. For me, doing the podcast, doing the things on the back end, I really feel like 200 is a reasonable goal for me. For other people, it may just be, let's make Champions League. Or let's win 1 week for the year and see if we can win a jersey. Because MLS is giving away jerseys this year for every round winner. That changes your strategy. I'm a little less inclined to play full value game early on because I am playing for the long haul and I want to keep those points going. But if your goal is just to make Champions League, or if your goal is to make just win a week. Maybe playing purely value early on is going to be a big improvement for your chances. If I can go up an average of about 3 million around at the beginning, which is kind of where I was at last year. Um, that's not a bad value increase. It's a little bit on the low side, but I had a rough start last year. If I'm there and getting my points, but you're able to pull closer to a 4.5 or a 5 million increase every round for those first few rounds, I mean, by round 6 or 7, you could have me beat by 5, 6, 7 million in team value if you work it right and I keep steady on my pace. Who's going to have a better shot at winning the single round at that point and getting lucky with some big names hitting? I mean, it let it play into your strategy, what choice you make. But there's a ton of math behind this that we try to unmask a little bit. We've gotten to know more as we go. So the big takeaways I would have on this are know your strategy and play into it, or know your goals and play into that. Know what strategy you need to employ. Remember that 2/3 rule, because that is the biggest lifesaver early in the season. If you don't expect a guy to get 2/3 of his points or of his value in points, he's going to lose. He's going to lose value for your team. Avoid that at all costs, and then look at these guys. I've had some of them on the screen, but look at those cheaper options you expect to have a decent game to try to pad your value a little bit as a tiebreaker. You may have 8 million left in the bank for your final player, and you go, I don't like any of the remaining $8 million options. Let's go for that. Or you may be looking at a cheap forward versus a cheap defender. Maybe it's scrubbing 2 forwards and putting 2 defenders in who have good clean sheet chances to try to get that value there, because you know a 2 from a forward, it could be a guaranteed price loss at that point, and you go from there. So tailor these to your strategy, but definitely take a look at some of these numbers that we've thrown out there and look for those cheap options that are going to get you that to fill in your roster so you don't fall behind. And I'd love to hear what your strategy is. I know it's always a competition early in the season to see who gets the highest price rise. If you get one of those monster price rises, hit us up on Twitter. Let us know. We like to shout those out because we always want to see who's having crazy starts. Anyway, hope everybody finds this helpful, and good luck in round 1.